Good morning. So, as we said, this is the first time we've done this event on a scale like this, and we're experimenting a little bit about what time people get out of bed in different parts of the world and when they show up. I can guarantee you that next year the first session probably won't start till 9 o'clock. But thank you so much for being here. We thought we had a terrific start to this meeting based on all of the very intense conversations we saw around the hotel last night, the great night owls and the discussions there, and just the very strong vibe that you feel in this room. We're going to start out by talking about the future, the iGeneration this morning, and to do so, we've asked Wright, longtime Washington Post reporter, and now at the Wilson Center, to lead the discussion. Robin, thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I am particularly honored and thrilled to chair this session this morning because I think it is something that is so important in looking at what happens not just in the Middle East but across the region. We have 5 very distinguished panelists, and I'd like to introduce them briefly. Their full bios are in your participants list. Rahma Bourqia is the former president of Hassan II University in Casablanca. She has the distinction of being the very first woman to be a president of a university in Morocco, and was also a member of the commission that reviewed family law. She was appointed by the king, and it led to what was one of the most profound changes in law for women anywhere in the Arab world. I ask each person to give me one little factoid about them personally, and she is a Berber and a runner, runs every morning, and she's given up to join us this morning. Henry Wallice Charles is CEO of Genesis Consulting and a provider of services involving youth development. He's also regional director of the Commonwealth Youth Program for the Caribbean. Now, his unusual factoid is that he's a board member of the St. Lucia Lottery Commission and is one of the, unfortunately, that makes him ineligible for ever winning. Mohammed J is CEO of QCell in the Gambia and a leader in internet and technology services in West Africa. He is a soccer player and he plays every Saturday, and this is what he's given up today to join us. We are particularly honored to have Yves Leterme join us. He is Deputy Secretary General of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. He's both a former Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Belgium. And his distinction is that he is also a regional cycling champion. Last but not least is Farah Pandith, who is special representative to the Muslim world for the United States. She was telling me last night that she, in her job, has traveled to 70 Muslim countries and is the human face in outreach to the Islamic world. And her unusual factoid is that she writes children's books. So I would like to begin with Yves in asking the kind of broad question this morning, and that is, what are the challenges that we face as we move into kind of phase 2 of change, whether it's in the Arab world and Europe? We know that the young have access to technology. We know that they have the education to understand other parts of the world, the factors of globalization. What are the obstacles? What are the factors that are going to define what happens next?
Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. I think, first of all, the iGeneration, the common factor is the I. But in fact, the situation of young people differs enormously from the one region to the other. The region where I come from, in Europe, We have the aging of society debate. This side of the world is the greening of society, so it's completely different. But to answer your question, I think the three main challenges young people look at is that our generation and the last generations made a lot of debt, a lot of deficits. They will have to pay back. And in the aging societies, they will have to pay for the retirement schemes, which are not funded until now. Secondly, we spoiled a lot of natural resources. And the question is if there is enough for the coming 100, 150, 200 years. And thirdly, we had quite a good economic system. And I think the basic elements of the economic system, the free market, is okay. But due to a lack of regulation, a good regulation, we made a mess of it. And for the daily life of a lot of young people, that means that they are in the category of 50% unemployed. And they have some chances, but they are, well, they are very anxious because for the first time maybe in world's history, the younger generation is not sure to be in a better situation than their parents. And so I think these three facts are really, apart from the common iGeneration characteristic, are really the three main challenges young people face.
Let me move to Morocco since Morocco is our host this morning. Here you have unemployment 30% between the ages of 15 and 29. When I went to Sidi Bouzid, the town where the uprising began in Tunisia a few months ago, and I went to the same street corner where Mohammed Bouazizi set himself on fire, I talked to the young fruit vendors there and I said, okay, 1 year later, what do you think? And they said, we have far more freedoms and far fewer jobs. Can you address this question of where the discontent, the energy is going, particularly in the Arab world? I think we can't hear her.
So I think well, we have to stress one fact, first of all. I mean, when we talk about youth, there are some commonalities since we are talking about the Atlantic Basin. So some commonalities between youth is the sense of identity of youth is emerging, I mean, all over the world. This is why we find that, I'm in contest, we find it in the Arab world, but also in Madrid, in Wall Street, and so on. So this is a commonality, but there are differences also when we talk about our region, and in this region, when it comes to the Middle East, for example. The contest is, I mean, a demand for more freedom, I mean, for the youth or for the young people, I mean, to express themselves. I mean, because they were frustrated somehow for a long time, I mean, to express themselves. And the uprising is giving them, I mean, an opportunity, I mean, to make their claims and demands for society. What is the message coming from the world order and from their own society? From the world order, I mean, the idea, the message of crisis, I mean, is an idea. A crisis, financial crisis, economic crisis, crisis in education. Everybody is talking about crisis in education, political crisis, and so on. So this is a message that the youth are getting from this open era with the new information technology. And when it comes to their context, I mean, of course, they are talking about, I mean, crisis of democracy and so on. So in this context, we find this contest of youth. But now that there is, I mean, an era is coming an era for freedom, more demands are going to be put, I mean, on states, because youth are asking for urgent solutions for employment, for, I mean, improving the way of their lives, and so on. So I think from now on, we are going to deal with this. So the issue is what are, the opportunities to be offered, what are the strategies, we are going, to have, to tackle this issue.
Mohammed, let's look at Africa for a moment. When you go down to the Google headquarters in California, one of the things that's striking are the dots that they have going into the sky from different regions, showing what the internet use is for the connectivity. And of course, the one part of the world where there are the fewest dots are in sub-Saharan Africa. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the use of technology differs? What are the obstacles? How are the patterns of change different, or and how are they affecting politics in your part of the world?
We all agree that the development of information and communication technology.
I think we can't hear again.
It's still developing.
We all agree that the development of communication and information technology, mainly through the internet, has transformed the economic and political scene all over the world and has affected the lives of everybody, especially the youth. And if we say that the youth are about 35% of our population, then you can imagine the transformation. If you look at Africa today, you will see so many cables going around Africa, especially in West Africa. We have a East landing cable, which is going to connect most of the African countries there. And you can imagine the amount of bandwidth being dropped there. But not only that, but the amount of information coming from outside down to the youth there, which they don't have any relation with. Like, they're just receiving the content, but the content is so different from our culture. And I believe that in Africa, our politicians, they normally neglect the youths. They only concentrate on the voters. So the youths are receiving all this information, and they don't know how to manage information. So this is a big challenge. For example, my 8-year kid knows all the names of the Premier League football team players, but if you ask him a name of a player in Gambia, he doesn't know. So that's just an example. And because the democracies, for example, the political democracies in other countries, for example, in the West, where this information is coming from, is so different from our democracies, it's going to be a big challenge. So I foresee that in the future, if we don't manage the youths properly, then we'll have a problem.
Henry, how do you think technology is affecting the political realities, the political factors in your part of the world?
Well, first of all, I must say that one of the biggest challenges in terms of youth and young people and the development in the Caribbean and that region there is the sense that they are not sufficiently well positioned within the development process. They are not allowed to participate. And they make the point all the time. Only 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting of youth leaders, and their position was, look, we are not mendicants. We are not here with a shopping list begging for charitable considerations by heads of government. They are citizens, and therefore they should be, and they have a right to be part of the process. And so what is happening in terms of the political process is that you have a process which is largely untenable. The old power relationships in the society is creating much of the economic divisions, much of the social exclusion of young people. And young people are increasingly aware of that, and therefore what they're doing is developing their own societies, if you want to call it, their own networks, using, of course, the information technology that they have at their disposal. And I dare say that they're far more advanced than the status quo. And so what you have is rather than embracing that positive into the governance and development processes, you have a situation where the status quo is looking at it, looking at young people and their networks in a kind of condescending type of way. And that really is the basis for much conflict that will arise, that is already simmering and will continue to arise. If you poll the young people in the Caribbean, many of them will tell you that the political systems are irrelevant as far as they are concerned.
Fascinating. Farah, last but not least, as you mentioned, you've been to 70 countries in your current position. When you and I were talking last night, you said you had a really optimistic perspective on the future, which was striking given the deep frustrations we all find because of unemployment, because of the fact that these kids have deconstructed autocratic paths, but they haven't been able to really shape the next phase, the new order. So tell us a little bit why you're so optimistic about the iGeneration and what happens next.
Well, so first of all, I want to thank you very much to GMF for putting youth up on the table first thing on Saturday morning. I think it's really important that we think about the investment we need to make with 3 billion people in the world right now who are under the age of 25. That is a startling and important data point. I want to pick up on a couple of facts that were stated. You asked questions about technology, and in the work that I do as a special representative to Muslim communities on behalf of the Department of State, I have been asked to interface with young Muslims under the age of 30, and the reason for that is 1/4 of the planet is Muslim. Out of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, 62% of which are under the age of 30. So the investment that we're making in listening to the ideas on the ground is very important, both in the short and in the long term. I can't help but be optimistic. I'm a realist. I understand that there are frustrations. Of course there are. Muslims and non-Muslims have frustrations about their future. We talked about jobs. We talked about yesterday, there were a couple of other trends. I think Zenia brought up issues of health crises and other things that are happening globally. But when I listen to a young Muslim in Sao Paulo or in Rabat or in Brussels or in Malaysia, I hear the same thing across the globe. You talked about networks, and I can't underscore enough that this generation wants to be heard. They are the digital divides that existed before in face-to-face situations are eradicated when you're talking about technology. It doesn't matter how rich you are, it doesn't matter what color you are, it doesn't actually matter what religion you are. The ideas for these young people are percolating around the world. So when I talk to youth and I ask them how to solve problems, I hear the energy and the passion that they want to go forward. And let's just look at the last 5 years in terms of the ideas that young people have moved forward. So I do understand that there are some severe and very important things that we as governments and non-governments have to think about. But when I think about harnessing the ideas of young people and how we move them forward, these are the answers to a lot of global problems. And I will say to you that for Muslims, I'm so happy you mentioned the word identity. There is an identity crisis happening around the world with Muslims. And I would say to you that if we do not find ways to connect the voices of these young people who are looking in an optimistic way, that are trying to figure out who they are, the void that is left will be filled with external ideologies that you don't want them to hear. So this is why we have to invest in young people. We have to listen to what they have to say and what they need. And I believe that if we do that, some of the answers on the ground, bridges between both government and non-government, as well as the virtual networks that these young people have, will make a difference on our planet, for sure.
Thank you very much. I want to open it up to questioning. And I particularly am interested in having the young professionals weigh in. I believe they're sitting over here. Oh, they're integrated today. I'm particularly interested in hearing what they might have to say about what's happening among them, and whether you have the kinds of networks evolving that cross the Atlantic, or even are developing among their communities, whether they're common goals, a sense of let's harness this energy we have in common goals. I believe you had a question? Yes.
Thank you, Robin, for addressing the younger generation here. I'm Nick Gowing. And what I'd like to do is help link this to anxieties and borders, which we're going to be talking about later. Because let me ask you to turn your arguments on their head. I've written about this, warning about what would happen as in the Arab revolutions and so on. It's the inability of leadership and the status quo in the political leaderships in many countries now to understand the enormity of what is happening. I hear everything you're saying about the way the younger generation is connected and so on. The trouble is the political class don't get the enormity of what's happening, whether in Africa or many other countries, including China and elsewhere. And I'd like to ask you what your thinking is about how the status quo in the political elite, particularly in Africa, can begin to understand this. Because my argument would be, and you've just been in Sidi Bouzid, is why didn't the Egyptians understand what was happening in Tunisia? Why didn't the Libyans see what was happening in Egypt and Tunisia and Iran? And why didn't Syria see all of this? It's what I talked about as black swans. We don't realize what we don't realize. And I'd put to you that this is what you're seeing in the political leadership. They believe that because of the way they've got to power, they will remain in power. And they can't get the new matrix of power. They're in denial about it. The mindsets are wrong to cope with it.
Thank you, Nick.
But just to respond to what Nick was saying, I think, he's around long enough to know that there is the status quo and the state structure will carry, so to speak, young people up to a certain point. The moment where the feeling is that young people is about change, is about changing the paradigms of power and of development, then there is going to be the divide. And so it is not necessarily a question of these leaders not getting it. These leaders have reached a point where they represent the old paradigm and the benefit out of it. And so the young people are looking for change, and the new paradigm of power and of wealth distribution and of social inclusion, there's going to be that polarity. And it is for the young people to organize themselves, whether it's through the networks, and to bring about a change. Unfortunately, in some situations, it turns out to be civil unrest, it turns out to be, some cases, violent. One would prefer it not to be that way, but the reality is that it becomes the responsibility of the young people to rescue us from that old, dug-in system that is creating much of the social injustice and economic problems and challenges that we have in the world today.
Mm-hmm. I'd be particularly interested in hearing from some of the young people in the audience. What are we missing? You know, what is happening next? Did anybody else want to weigh in on this question?
No, this one. Well, I want to, around the question of why the elite, in power are not responding, to the youth demands. I think we have to take into account that we are in a phase where you have an old order and a new one is coming. And we see the signs of changes, in two institutions that are major institutions for social integration. Let's say the family and the school. The family, something is going on in terms of change. In the family in the Middle East, women have access now to the labor market, and it's a major change. Between the relationship between men and women, relationship between generations, and the youth are saying, that we have the right to comment. We have the right, to express ourselves. So the family is changing. The school also, which is built around the paradigm of authority, is also changing, because the teacher is no more, a figure of power, a figure of authority, but also he has to be a facilitator in the educational system. So we have seen these changes are coming on the bottom, on the, let's say, in society. So, and the youth are saying we would like, to accelerate this change. Of course, the elite is formatted, is trained in the old paradigm of power. There are some resistance, but it's an issue of time. It's an issue of time. We have to take into account, the issue of time.
And one of the things we haven't mentioned is the extraordinary change in all of the regions, but particularly in the Arab world, of women. When you think that two of the most repressive societies in the region, Saudi Arabia and Iran, that over 60% of the university students are female today. There's such, when you integrate half the population, you bring them into the system, they are educated and they know that they're players, they have ambitions that extend beyond the home, that begins to change society and the political system as well. Yes, you're one of our young professionals. I think we can't hear him. We still can't hear him. Okay.
My name is Bako Kantiok. I'm from Nigeria. I'm really happy we're having this discussion because in my own country, I think it's just like we're talking about what's happening in my own country. You have a situation where youths are intentionally excluded from governance. The youth leader of the present ruling party in Nigeria is a 72-year-old man. Can you imagine that? And the person who is in charge of youth affairs is a 56-year-old person. So we as youths, in order to challenge or question the art of governance, we rely heavily on the social media. And now the Senate President, just 2 weeks ago, said they're thinking of regulating the social media. And for us, that is a problem. Because previously in January, when they hiked fuel prices, it was the social media that we used as a platform to organize and protest. And they reverted the fuel prices to the amount it was before. So what I'm trying to say is this. It will become a problem if we see them as intruding in our own space, in our own forum, in which we use to organize and mobilize ourselves and to question the ethics of governance. So my question to you is, seated on the platform, how can we prevent this from happening? Because I'm sure it's not only in Nigeria, it's also a post-existential threat in probably other countries too, where you have the social media emerging as a viable means to question the art of governance. Thank you.
Yves?
2 or 3 remarks. I think the picture you painted is reality in lots of countries. I would say even in countries where you would not expect it. It's an obvious fact that governments, public authorities as a whole, are very absent, on average, in the debate in social media. And I think they should be present. They should be present in a constructive way. They should argue, they should show what public authorities, what collective services are providing in order to prevent what I would call the 2 main handicaps of social media, being the fact that it's these are very short messages, there's a lack of nuance, and there is a lack also of mid-term and long-term debate. It's social media are very much relying on impulses, on instant reactions. And so I think public authorities engaging more actively, more constructively, not trying to forbid what's happening on social media, but involving in the debates would be already one very important step to try to close the gap, which is now growing between the iGeneration, which is very active, and sometimes with very good ideas in social media, and then on the other side, the leadership, the political leadership, the governments, that have a kind of fear of what social media are all about.
Farah.
So a couple of things. One, to my friend from Nigeria, I'm really happy you brought that up, and I want to link it to the question that Nick asked about how governments can change and integrate the youth perspective in all of this. I will tell you that I'm beginning to see many more governments who are asking questions about how they can in fact do this. I will say that our government is learning and catching up in some remarkable ways. I think the way in which we're looking at what Secretary Clinton would call 21st century statecraft is important. The fact that our ambassadors are tweeting is a big deal. The fact that an average citizen anywhere in the world can send me a direct message on Twitter to say, Farah, I heard you were in such and such place. Did you meet this person? Did you meet this group? I don't agree with what you said here. There's an interface that's going back and forth with senior government officials and civil society, which has never happened before. We're looking at a world in which, if Facebook were a nation, it would be the third largest nation in the world. Every single month, there's an average of 90 postings by an average Facebook user. I mean, these are stats that make a difference to how we think about the movement of ideas. You use the word emerging social media, and I would say it's emerged. You are far ahead of anything that government can keep up with. The pace and the context of how you think is not just based on analytics, it's also based on emotion. So what I'm seeing, I love the fact that you used the fact that there was a 72-year-old man in Nigeria who was head of the youth council. What I would say to you is what I'm seeing around the world, that it's non-traditional leaders that are taking the microphone. So even though there might be a context, a youth movement or youth organization, it's the person that has a blog. It's the person that's tweeting nonstop. They're people who you wouldn't expect that are getting the limelight, both male and female, conservative and non-conservative. So I think that there has been a youth revolution and revelation that's happening at the same time, and it's about whose ideas are better. And I think that that's where government is trying to come to listen and to understand. And frankly, and the last thing I would just say is, as I think about the opportunities that we have, there's certainly some real huge challenges with the fact that you can open everything up, and how do you contain it? The genie's out of the bottle. I mean, you're not going to be able to contain what's happening. I keep talking about a youthquake happening in the world, and I absolutely believe that in a good way. But I think that the challenge for governments is to understand how to harness and celebrate and go with the flow, so that you're moving answers to real problems, whether it's poverty or whether it is human rights or whether it's literacy. Because what I'm seeing is that young people have answers that governments have never ever thought about.
Interesting point. Yeah.
Just one quick thing from the comrade from Nigeria, and that is also, I think it is a question of young people themselves being able to use the social media or whatever to better organize themselves. To build that critical mass. And you know, my colleague here is a politician. He'll tell you politicians understand the thing of critical mass. If you are 2 or 3 persons, or you could be 1 million shouting from different corners, unless they feel there is that gelling and there is that critical mass building, they will not respond. There's also we talked earlier about the crisis everywhere. Every time you read the newspaper, you listen to the news, it's going to be a crisis, whether it's social, economic crisis. I think there's also that, in terms of young people being able to say what they bring on the table. You know, that look, this is what we can bring. This is how we can work together to get us out of this morass, out of this thing that it is. It may take some time, but I think that argument has to be made. And there are powerful examples of that. Only a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure all of us, or many of us here, were glued to our television sets, or had the privilege of being in the pavilions in London 2012. And we saw the power of young people's success. When those Jamaicans won medals, people forgot that the IMF was at the doorsteps and they were hugging up each other and jumping down the street. That is the power of young people. That's what young people can bring to bear in terms of the change. And it reminds me of a section for those who may be familiar with the Bible, the book of Lamentation, where the writer is lamenting how deserted that city, which was once this flourishing city, had become, and was saying that even the city's lovers had abandoned it. Many of our countries and our regions are that way. The governments may not say it openly because it might mean they might be kicked out of office tomorrow, But quietly they're saying, hello, we are sinking, we need help. They are saying it in all kinds of ways. And it is for the young people using that same network and other, do not forget the old forms of organizing, of pulling themselves together and saying, look, let us see how we can present something, how we can say, here is what we are about. Yes, we're looking at change, but with your immediate problem, this is what we can bring. If you invest in us, this is what we can bring about. And a quick example, unemployment, for instance. You hear governments talk about they talk about unemployment usually from a problem standpoint. You know, we have to do so and so. Too many young people unemployed. We need to get them to speak of unemployment as an opportunity of human capital that you have there, social capital that you have, that you can invest to remodernize and reposition your economies.
I think Farah made a particularly important point, and I'd be interested in hearing from some of the young, that along with the iGeneration, we also have an iGap. That the young have found not only a voice and a means to get it out there, but we have this terrible problem of governments either not listening or not knowing how to respond. And that the iGap is likely to be the great challenge that governments, wherever they are, face for the next decade. Young? You're young?
You're young. That's a good question.
Count your gray hairs.
Okay.
Former young.
Yes, to be young.
Hi. Thank you very much. I would like to
Can you
start...
tell us who you are?
Yes, I'm Wright Hamza. I'm a youth activist and I work at the Rabat School of Governance and Economics in Rabat. So welcome to Morocco, all of you. I want to start by one of the questions that you raised before, which is what's missing. And I would like also to go back to what Mrs. Farah said, that there is a gap and we don't have the bridge. And that's the big problem. We tend I'm going to speak for our region, the Middle East and North Africa, we say that the youth are not in politics. But the last event showed us the contradictory. We are in politics. But what is missing from that? From my point of view, political parties and government are missing something, which is the eye. We have the generation, but they are missing the eye. If we look, for example, in Morocco, all the political parties, they have their websites. But how much of them are updated? None. None of the politicians in Morocco, at least, there was only one minister who was on Facebook and on Twitter on the last government. This government, there is none. So the youth, they are following the trend, they are following what's happening with the social media, with internet. But the political parties and government, they are not following that. So that's the problem. The second problem is and I'm going to go back to what's happening in today's world with what we say with the freedom of expression, the movie, and I'm not going to go back to that, but when we said that the youth, they have the freedom of expression, I don't think so. None of the youth in the world have the freedom of expression, because freedom of expression for me is to reach the audience that I want, and I cannot reach the audience that I want because I don't own a TV, I don't own a newspaper. I can scream on my corner, but no one will hear me. So only leaders, they have the freedom of expression because they have access to the television, they have access to newspapers and to the media, and they can reach the audience they want and not the audience the media wants. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, I'm Kumadif Chatterjee. I'm the founder and president of the European Young Innovators Forum. So first had a comment on the iGap, and second question, especially to Farah Pandith and Yves Leterme. On the iGap, I think there's one thing that you mentioned, Charles, which is very correct, is that the youth are not on the table. Well, okay, in Europe, this is not exactly entirely the case. The youth are on the table. But the question is, once we are on the table, what are we expected to do? I think that's what the iGap is. Most of the discussion is, come and tell us what you think, and we'll take that away, and we'll formulate policy and come back. I think that's a little bit behind the curve. What we're looking for is to be on the table as a partner, in formulating the policy, as a partner in formulating the programs that implement that policy, and as a partner for basically task sharing, to be a part of that governance and while not being in government itself. And that's why we're now self-organizing. I think I'm not entirely familiar with the scenario in Northern Africa, for example, or in Brazil, but in the US and in Europe, we are self-organizing. And so social media for us, and Yves, it's nice of you to say the government should keep up. I don't think you guys can keep up because we move very fast on that. And it's not that we're expecting you to keep up. We're expecting you to use what we can do to facilitate what's good for us and what's good for policy and moving the nation forward. So that is the gap. Not the fact that we are not being heard, but the fact that we are being heard but not being involved in the implementation. And the question, going back is, I think Farah mentioned that the US State Department is particularly active on what they call Diplomacy 2.0, and Alec Ross was there at an unconvention that we organized in Brussels a few weeks ago, and we selected him because he was on Twitter all the time, and we Facebooked with him, and that's why we invited him to come and speak to us. But the question is, where do you go from there? Is that a tool just to say, oh yes, we are a part of the voice? Or is that a tool to say, well, we are now a part of the movement? That's the next shift. And how do we address that challenge?
No. You're going to think that I paid you. I did not pay him to ask that question. So you set me up for having to defend. How do you get these voices that have cool ideas to do something with those ideas? Everything that I do in my office is to listen to what young people have to say and to build the platforms that they've asked me to build so that we're using government as the convener, the facilitator, and the intellectual partner with the ideas that we hear on the ground. So for example, an initiative that came out of listening to Muslims all over the world was to create something called Generation Change, because I believe the generation under the age of 30 is the change generation. We've built chapters around the world so that young people who are change makers, who are leaders, who have cool ideas to work on things together can be connected. An amazing idea in Oslo can be connected to an idea in Nouakchott. Somebody in Brazil that I talked to who has a really neat social entrepreneurship project can be connected to somebody in Kuala Lumpur. Through the generation, all we've done is to build that platform and to walk away. So when you say nobody's doing anything with your ideas, I promise you we're doing something with your ideas, because I think there is value, by the way, to listening to what young people have to say in the policy context and implementing it, because you can't be a government person all the time. But I think that more governments around the world should do the kind of innovative experimenting that we've tried to do to get these platforms built so that young people can do something. You're sitting next to Ahmed, who is the head of the Cedar Network here in Europe. In Europe, that has a bridge between Northern Africa and European Muslims. It didn't exist before 2008. And why did it exist? Because a platform was built because we understood that the power of his generation, that young people under the age of 30 matter, and that their input was going to make a difference to policy and politics. And you should spend some time talking to Ahmed about the kinds of things that they're doing. It's true, though. What I see as the change is change not just within your generation, but change within governments too. And I'm really happy you asked that question. Thanks.
Well, my name is Ahmed Larouz. I'm from Holland. I'm Moroccan. I'm a European, and I'm glad that I heard your voice today. And as you know, we admire you, and you supported CEDA from the first minute. So one of the points I really want to point in here today is what is the role of the diaspora in all of this discussion today? I know we having the diaspora around the world dealing with different issues, with leadership, with economy, with everything. And I know a lot of them. And we're based in 16 countries in Europe. And we have leaders, real leaders who really want to make change in their own countries or home countries. What is the position of those leaders in this discussion of today? Thank you.
Yeah. Rahma? Well, it's an interesting question. Of course, diaspora has a say and a place in all what we have been discussing on youth. I remember when I was president in university, the best the best, let's say, linkages we had with foreign universities where we find, I mean, a Moroccan, I mean, in that university. So I think the diaspora also has to be organized. When we talk about youth, I mean, we are dealing with a kind of postmodern group without leaders, without organization, without. So if we would like, I mean, that our ideas to get through, I mean, to the politicians, I think we need to be organized, whether we are diaspora or whether we are young people. Why I'm saying this? Because when we look back at what has happened in the Middle East, this last, I mean, since the uprising, I mean, youth went to the street, and later on, what happened? I mean, they went to the street, but without having a leader, without being, I mean, organized. And later on, I mean, we came back to the real politics. I mean, the ones who are engaged politically, and political parties, I mean, they run for the elections and to elect people. So why, I mean, youth couldn't get it, I mean, through? Because they are not, I mean, organized. This is why the organization is very important. When we look at what are the areas where, I mean, youth are expressing themselves, they do it in the street, the contests. They do it in social and media, because they are using, I mean, social media for criticism. They're doing politics, but kind of informal politics. But they do it also in civil society. I mean, when they are engaged, I mean, in associations and youth associations and so on. I mean, the one who have the chance to be heard are more, I mean, the one who are organized. So when I talk about diaspora, is the same. I mean, there is an organization, I mean, to make their ideas, I mean, go through. Of course, there is a place for diaspora.
Thank you. Yves wanted to make a point?
I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I think the essential function of governments is to engage in social media, I mean, at least for two things. First of all, as a new tool to inform people and to interact in very facts of daily life, fill in files and so on, or secondly, to have an informed debate, because there is a lack of, let's say there is a mismatch between social media and complexity of society, complexity of solutions to the problems we are faced with. There is a lack of long-term thinking, and there's a lack of critical mass of representativity. And my third thing is that I totally disagree when there is a tendency to say, well, the iMedia, the new social media, should be a kind of new form of democracy. No, this is a step too far. We have constitutions, we have parliaments, we have elected people, and these people have to decide. And if young people want to be involved in thinking, in policy making, they have to take responsibilities, they have to be candidates, and they have to be elected. And when they are elected, they can decide in the name of the people. But not having a kind of populist political culture coming from impulse reactions in social media, I don't think that is the right way to rule a country or a society.
Actually, that's a good point. And it makes me think also of our 72-year-old youth leader in Nigeria. And one of the great problems is we have this extraordinary wave of public sentiment that's out there in many forms, and yet we don't have it being channeled into the kind of leadership among the young that defines, that can help us through this transition, that tell us what's coming next. We get temporary folks like Wael Ghonim in Egypt, the young Google executive. But he doesn't emerge into the political system. And it's I'm curious from the young in this room, you know, where is the next group of leaders and where do they come from? Because we need more than just public sentiment. We need somebody to channel it.
Here. Thank you very much. My name is Benjamin Brake. I'm from Germany, and I'm working for IBM as a governmental advisor. I would like to look at this question from a very different perspective, because many of those who talked before me said that young people in Africa have problems to raise their issues, to address their problems to the political leaders. I'm not that pessimistic, I must say. I'm more pessimistic when I'm looking at the young people in Europe, I must say. Because in Europe, the share of the young population is shrinking and shrinking, yeah? So we will have problems to raise our voice and addressing our issues. I'm quite optimistic when looking at the African continent, or when looking to Brazil, for example, because there the population is growing and growing. This is only a question of time, I think. And so this might be an issue where Europe can learn from African countries and from South America.
Yes.
Oda Aberdeen, the Capital Trust Group. I have a comment about the panel. I'm glad you're asking these young men to voice their opinion, but there should have been a younger person on the panel to talk about my question about Muslim youth, and I spend a lot of time in the region. We talked about the iGeneration. We talked about the social media. But ultimately, you know what Muslim youth want and what Arab youth want? They want a better education. They want better skills. They want talent to be able to compete in this global environment where you have to produce. And what I would like to ask the panelists, don't you think the advanced countries should increase their portion of foreign aid to education, to creating talent, and reduce it to foreign aid that goes into other forms of assistance?
Rahma?
I mean, when we think about what are the opportunities, I mean, for the future, I would say, first of all, of course, education. Education and education and education. But in what sense, I mean, education? I think we have to shift from, I mean, the old paradigm of education to the new one. Because we have to take in our educational system all what has been said, I mean, this morning, about youth, about their demands, about their expression, and so on. So how to integrate, I mean, all this in a new design of the educational system. How to build, I mean, a system which combines between knowledge, skills, and, I mean, aptitude, I mean, to adapt to change. Because our system now is functioning in a way which is with the old paradigm. I mean, we're not making our students to adapt to these changes that are occurring in the world. So how to introduce this issue of adaptability? Because when you are talking about the gap, there is also a gap between the teachers in terms of information technology and with the students. I mean, the students now, they could in internet have all the knowledge they want. I mean, they could pick up. But I mean, when the teacher is not at the same level, I mean, of use of new technology, so it's a problem. So education is a requirement. I mean, reform of education and reforming our educational system, and to make also the match between what people, I mean, get in terms of education and what is demanded in the labor market, which it's an issue. Sometimes, I mean, there is a mismatch. So we have to invest in this. And how to integrate also, I mean, young people in designing, I mean, this educational, of course, system.
No, right here.
Hi, Zania Dormandy, Chatham House. Yves, I'd like to pick up something you said. I'd like to pick up something you said. You said youth have to work into the political system. They have to, and I actually fundamentally question that. Again and again and again, we're seeing that the traditional state actors are kind of having to move aside for new actors, for transnational groups, benign transnational groups and malignant transnational groups. But nevertheless, the role of the state isn't disappearing, absolutely not. But it is certainly being squeezed, being minimized. And so I actually question this idea that youth have to fit into our established state system and wonder whether we're leaving space for actually a whole new system that we haven't conceived of, which kind of brings me to something that Farah said. You said, we create the platform and then we get out of the way. And I ask whether we know what we're up for here by getting out of the way. I mean, I think it's great, but are we ready for the repercussions of that?
Let's ask Yves first.
For a personal fact, no, I think I stick to democracy. And at a certain moment, when you want to manage problems, you have to have one man, one vote systems, and you have to have representativity, and you have to have bodies that take decisions in the name of and that are controlled. And at the end of the game, people can decide whether there was a good management or a bad management. And whether you have iGeneration or platforms and so on, it's one man, one vote, and you pay taxes, and then you have the right to say what you think about policy. And so I totally agree with you that lots of the problems, the three I named, the aging of the population, the pollution, and the lack of regulation, for instance, in our economic system, these are typical transnational problems. But even in these three cases, when you approach them from an iGeneration point of view, of the young people meeting and having a exchange of views, at the end of the game, you have to take decisions. And as far as I'm concerned, I stick to democracy. These decisions are on the basis of one man, one vote, and we count the votes. And whether you're in an aging population system, a society which has an aging population, well, there it's right to say that, as the German colleague said, that the weight of the younger generation will be less than in, for instance, a country like Morocco, when political parties, when they want to win elections, they have to take into account maybe more than European democracies the voice of the young people. But that's the way it works.
So to the question of what kind of platforms you're building, and I think that that's a very important thing to be thinking about. What I was referring to is networks that you can build of like-minded thinkers, people who are trying to go towards positive change. I think about the need of this generation that is looking more to their own peers for answers than from the old establishment, right? So I think about the fact that you can be in Denmark talking to a Somali immigrant family in Denmark who says, I really want to hear what others who have gone through the same thing I've gone through are doing in other parts of Europe and in the United States. Can you help connect me to those similar experiences? I think about the amazing entrepreneur that I've met who is working on poverty alleviation and wants to hear from his own peer, in another part of Europe or another part of the world. And being able to make and cross-pollinate are the kinds of platforms I'm talking about. I talk about walking away because there is no value in having two people meet and go, now you need to talk about this and you need to talk about that. You stifle innovation and entrepreneurship when you do that. You want people who are passionate about a similar thing. And so those are the kinds of connections that I'm talking about and that I'm building. You're right to wonder, what is the global impact of this over the long term? What I'm saying is that I think governments need to be a little bit more experimental in how we think about things. We have a huge number of people on the planet under the age of 30 globally. If we don't invest in them now, what in God's name are we going to be doing in the future? And we have to listen to what their voices are saying. Whether or not everything they have to say is perfect or not, we have to give them the opportunity to speak peer-to-peer, to let their vision out so that we are able to see and harness their potential. And I think the caution that all of us would feel, because we've seen what happens when government becomes too precise and the kinds of things that we're trying to knit together, we are in a moment in time that is really special. I can only speak, I mean, my job is to talk to young Muslims under the age of 30, and I will say to you, when I think about this generation that has grown up every single day since September 12th, 2001, with the word Islam or Muslim on the front page of a paper, online and offline, something very precise has happened to this generation that has happened to no other generation before them. So I'm invested in making sure that this particular experience that they've had, their need to connect peer-to-peer happens, and it results, I hope, in some very positive interfacing around the world.
Yves, I want to get back to something in a minute, just plant this idea. Is there something called iDemocracy, and is it different than democracy? But think about that for a minute. I wanted to get to another young person here.
Thank you. Good morning. Mahmoud Jain is my name. I'm the Gambia's ambassador in Brussels. And thank you for the opportunity. I wanted us to look at the other side of the coin. In my part of the world, most of the population don't have access to the internet. It therefore begs two questions in my mind. First, how representative are the views of those who participate in these blogs and so on? How else would you explain the outcome of the Egyptian elections? And secondly, given that what I would call the silent majority are not heard, what can be done to ensure that their voice is heard in this debate? Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Ambassador. Hello? In our part of the world, as he said, most people don't have connectivity to the internet, and the upper class or the middle class have that connectivity. So the views of those guys, is it different from the views of the guy at the village level? And yes, it's different in the sense that when I started talking, I spoke about content. Even the views of the guys who are connected, it's not their own view. They're getting the content from outside. And the local environment is totally different from wherever that content is coming from. And I think that's the biggest challenge, you know, for us in Africa. One of the speakers spoke about it. Even in terms of regulation, the politicians can even stop that content coming to you. So really, is it your voice? Are you talking on your behalf? The democracies are completely different. So I think for me, the fundamental issue here is governance. You know, the governance structures in our countries are completely different. You know, there is no democracy. You know, you can't speak your mind. So even if you're on Facebook or on Twitter, you're just exchanging view with somebody far away from you. But if you want to give your own view about your local environment, it's a problem. So yes, one, connectivity is an issue which governments are trying to solve. But I think the challenge is whether the politicians are ready to listen to the local view, you know, which is completely different from the outside view.
I have to say, as someone who is part of the Vietnam generation, you know, I identify with the young who say the governments don't listen. They didn't listen to us then all that much either. Back here, I've been given us a 10-minute warning, so I'm asking everybody to be brief.
Hi, my name is Lena Mackentun, and I come from Germany, and I'm here as a representative of the private sector. And I was thinking during the whole discussion that there might be not too much differences between the ideas that youth have and that also many people from the older generation have. And I think one good example was the Occupy movement that took place in Frankfurt, for example, in New York, and many other places of the world. And I think there have been many good thoughts which would have been supported also by the older generation, even grandparents. And I think there was a lot of missed opportunities from both sides to talk about the concepts and to find the similarities. So that it's not a problem of the older generation, of the younger population, but more maybe new concepts for all of us, the youth, the older generation, all over the world. I think it's more about events like this to find opportunities to discuss between the two, to find similarities that can be also presented or represented in the political committees and in the established systems.
A couple more questions and then let each one of you wrap up. Yeah. The woman right here.
Hello. Hi, I'm Yasmin Dolatabadi from Google Ideas, which is a think tank at a technology company. We know Farah really well. So my question is, a lot of youth are saying that we're talking and we're not really getting through. And a lot of the panelists are kind of saying, we're hearing or we're listening. But clearly the connection's not quite made. And I've heard Google and Twitter and Facebook be mentioned. So my question is, if you could ask the world's leading technology companies for one thing, one innovation to help bridge the gap, what would it be?
Great question. And right here.
I'm Jennifer Nero from the Eastern Caribbean, and I am listening to find the underlying problem, and it's about a voice. And I think the youth really has been struggling for a voice. And I think that is what the technology would have provided. So they can be heard. Who is listening to their peers? And I think if we are to learn from that is what do we do as parents, as adults, as leaders to listen and to make sure that the voice, that the media, the eye connection is afforded, is respected, or else we will be finding ourselves in some serious difficulty because they're talking. We need to listen. Thank you.
One last question here, and then I'll let each one of you reflect on a final comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm the Brazilian ambassador in Morocco. My question is, don't we talk too much about tools and not too much about ideas? Because I remember, I was young, but in the 60s, there was no internet, there was no English, there was no Facebook, there were no cheap flights, and we had revolutions all over. Revolutions on the left, not only in the Muslim areas. On the left, on the right, we had young people taking power. Gaddafi was 27 years old. We had Kennedy and all over. We had in Brazil, and we made the revolution. We did not wait anybody to make a platform and give to us. We took it. Power, we don't receive, we take.
Okay, I want each one of you to take some slice of what the final round of questions, and let's begin with Rahma.
Well, I would like just, to react about the difference between e-democracy, i-democracy, and democracy. It's the difference, there is a difference, of course, but this difference is like the difference between the formal and informal. When we talk about, social networks and internet as an area conveying ideas or a voice, it's not only one voice, and I agree with you, many voices, because social networks are about, sharing ideas, but about conveying extremism, sometimes not good ideas for the cohesion of society, for integration of the world order, and so on. So in new technology are a tool, but not ideas. This is why I come to, the educational system, because the educational system should give, I mean, the students and, all the students the way how to use in a right way, I mean, new technology. Right way, not in the sense of moral, I mean, right way, but how to benefit from what is offered, I mean, by new technology. Of course, when we come to democracy, then, I mean, the youth have to be organized. I mean, to be organized in civil society or in political parties, but also, when we ask youth to be organized, we should also go to the political parties, especially in the area of ours, I mean, to say that they have to change their ways, I mean, of doing politics. We have to do politics in another way, to be in democracy.
Well, yes. President Ambassador made is very, very important. But to reiterate the point that was made earlier, young people, and in the iGeneration, whatever you want to call it now, they do not just want to be heard. That's not the objective. If that is what we're trying to do, then we're missing the point altogether. And I think the partner here said it well. They want to, and not that they want to, they should be strategic partners in development. How can you go about the development ethos that leaves out the talent, the creativity, the dynamism of 50% of the world population? I mean, it's madness, you know? The other thing that I think we need to look at seriously as governments, major organizations, is that young people should not be seen or treated as an item under the expenditure line. They should be under the investment side. And there's a fundamental difference. I mean, when you talk about expenditure, what it brings up in your mind is something that is lost irretrievably. When you talk about investment, it brings about hope of benefits to be derived. And I think some of those, we need to just sit back and just think of it as governments and say, hey, it's not about these people looking to just come and take over our thing. It is about them wanting to be part of this process of creating a better life for all of us. And that goes for youth organizations, because the point we were making a while ago about there's the new tool, there's the new group out there speaking, but they might be missing the political structure. The youth organizations that exist must check themselves as well, because some of them have become so formalized that they've lost touch with the grassroots of young people. And there is need for them to look at that so that they can give leadership, so to speak, to that movement that is out there. Thank you.
Mohammed.
Yeah, just to answer to her question, if I was going to look at anything the social networks have done, social networks for us in Africa is to make sure that we have legislation wherein we don't censor those social networks, because that's a big problem for the youths in Africa. You know, most of these social networks are censored, and you cannot put your views across. Yeah.
Thank you. Yves.
Well, I couldn't agree more than with the Brazilian ambassador, and I'm glad that there was an intervention from this side of the room. iDemocracy is a tool, but iDemocracy doesn't bring automatically, there's a kind of misunderstanding, solutions. Google, Facebook won't solve the problems of the world. They are spreading a tool, but they don't bring solutions. Google and Facebook don't solve problems. They just give us a supplementary channel to put on the agenda problems. Secondly, iDemocracy is very good at mobilizing. It's very good at having very quick, speeding up reactions of people. But once again, what I said before, at the end of the game, you have to sit together at a table in a meeting room, and you have to decide on a democratic basis, where the guy that is 72 years old, not in Nigeria, but in Belgium, and that doesn't use Twitter, has the same rights to vote and to say yes or no to a solution than the young guy who's very keen at Twitter. And third remark, be very careful in a kind of celebrating direct democracy. You know, you're a woman. The country in Europe where voting rights were last granted to women was Switzerland, and the problem was direct democracy.
Interesting, interesting. And can you also answer this fascinating question about what tool would most contribute?
So I want to thank Yasmin from Google Ideas for posing that question to all of us, and I'm going to take you up on your offer, okay? One, for those of you who don't know what Google Ideas is, it is a really remarkable effort on behalf of Google. I do not work for them, but they're hitting an issue that hits every part of the world, and that is extremism, and they're looking at it through another lens. So what I would say to you is to help. Governments cannot do it all. They have a very obviously important role, and there's a system in place, and I believe that we have to use multilateral organizations and bilateral relationships and all the traditional tools that we have in our toolbox. But when I look at the demographics worldwide, and I understand, I agree with the gentleman who talked about Africa and the internet penetration, but I would say to you that 4/5 of this planet has a cell phone, okay? And you are seeing all across Africa, the mobilization of ideas through SMS messages and through groupings, and you know that as well as I do. But what I would do is I would try to get my co-conspirators in the technology space to do the kind of thing that Google did, which was to look around at world problems, whether it is poverty, whether it is illiteracy, women's rights, whatever the issue happens to be, that they began to think in an out of the mainstream way to gather new ideas to help bring them to the forefront, because you have a platform that we do not have as government. And the kind of things that you did in Dublin to push ideas forward on extremism so that we could see the links between gangs in LA and extremists in London were really powerful. So what happens if Facebook and Twitter and any other platform in the technology space begins to think more proactively about ways to do a public-private partnership, if you want to call it that, but to think out of the box first? Secondly, and this is my last comment, I would say there are many media people in this room. I'm looking at the images of youth. I don't see happiness out there. I'm not saying I'm not Pollyanna, but I would add a piece here that balances both the rage that you see in that photograph with the opportunities that are taking place with young people who are doing things, so that the only paintbrush you see for youth isn't always dismal, isn't always they are the victims. Because if you continue to do that, the narrative will never change. And I think we owe it to ourselves to be balanced in the way in which we understand this demographic. And that is something that technology can do as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you all very much, and I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to get to everyone. Please join me in thanking Rahma, Henry, Mohammed, Yves, and Farah.
Me in joining in thanking Robin Wright. That was a terrific session. Thank you so much. That was really very thoughtful and inspirational. We're going to take a 15-minute break and then come back in. We're going to catch up, don't worry. Thank you all, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.